Hello and welcome to the Murder Media podcast, where we analyse and overthink true crime. You can follow the Murder Media project at Instagram and Facebook at murdermedia81, or you can email me directly at murdermedia81@gmail.com. And all episodes are on Spotify, Amazon Music, and the other one, Apple Music, Apple iTunes, whatever the fuck it's called. Anyway, today I've got the pleasure of being joined by my friend, Dr. Tom Watson. He is Senior Lecturer in Transmedia Production at Teesside University. Tom, welcome to the Murder Media podcast. How are you?
Hi, Stella. I really appreciate you having us on the podcast. Like I was saying before, it's the first time I think I've ever kind of done something like this. So I'm not necessarily looking forward to like hearing my voice as it's recorded back to me. These broad northern kind of tones, shall we say. But there we go. I'm doing fine. In the middle of kind of prep for the forthcoming semester, as we all are. Which we've kind of discussed various anxieties about that. So this is a nice thing to do before that. Probably the last nice thing to do post summer that I'll be doing before the teaching commences, I think. So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking about that as well yesterday, that like with teaching prep, everything gets going on Monday. Not really going to come up for air now until what, December rather?
December. Probably like last couple of weeks in December, a much needed break, and then the merry-go-round starts again.
Then it's market, so
oh, lovely! I love lovely assessments. Excellent.
But you mentioned having to listen to your own voice. I think I'm over that now because I have to do the editing, so I have to listen to myself. But the thing that I learned about myself, and sort of, what have you learned from doing this podcast? A thing that I've learned is how lazy I am when I talk.
Right.
Like there's just words where I just don't say the whole word. I miss off loads of letters. I run loads of words into each other, and it's like, Jesus Christ, like I didn't realise I was so lazy. But is that just an accent thing? Is it a Manc thing? But listening to everyone else, it's like, no. Listening to people who've been doing podcasts for years and they're like really careful in how they speak, and I'm like, oh, I don't do that. Really lazy. Right then, so I've invited you on to talk about true crime, your true crime habits. Not your true crime habits, that sounds like you go out murdering. Your true crime viewing habits, consumption habits, and I've got some questions for you. They're the same questions that I asked Laura and Shelley all those episodes ago. So we'll go through those, but then there's a particular case and a particular set of documentaries and things that we want to talk about that we'll get to in the second half. So we'll just start with the first question then. Where did your love or like, you might not love it, this might be a pointless endeavour, where did your love of true crime start? Do you remember what you first watched or what you first read? Where did this begin?
So there's a few interesting kind of cases, or like not cases as in the true crime cases, but in instances, shall we say, that I can remember. And it's interesting, like I've been listening to some of the other episodes, and one of the common themes seems to be that it's people's mums are really invested in true crime narratives, whatever they may be. So I think like the other guests that you've had, so obviously your friend our friend Shelley and your mate Laura, was my mum's bookshelf, and she had a lot of stuff like, like the Thomas Harris kind of Silence of the Lambs, Red Dragon, all that kind of stuff, which was kind of always a bit of a curiosity of mine, because my mum did make the conscious effort. I'm not sure why, because I wasn't necessarily a reading age yet, of kind of putting these things on the top shelf of our bookcase that we had. And a lot of that was kind of mixed in with things like Stephen King. So I remember that it was the version of the book that had Pennywise's red eyes coming through the kind of the sewer, the drain thing with the balloon. And that was always intriguing. I've kind of been around it a lot, even though I wasn't able to kind of read any of that. And obviously, as you know, the Silence of the Lambs and things like that was obviously influenced by sort of real criminal cases and things like that. And then I think there he is. And then in related to that, many trips to Forbidden Planet when I was a kid. And one of the first things I saw there that just has been burnt into my memory was the one sheet poster for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So there's Ed Gein again there. So that was kind of like, I suppose, like some of the iconography of that was like always like made me curious about that. And then in relation to that as well, so it's all kind of connected, which is interesting. Being a certain age, my mom would like record films from TV for me a lot. So a lot of my kind of abiding memories are watching kind of VHS tapes with adverts from various kind of commercials of the day.
Oh, I love an old advert.
It's amazing. It's like I vaguely remember sort of like Diet Coke adverts. There seemed to be a lot of Diet Coke advertisements during the films that I was watching. I'm not really sure what that means at all. I don't know. Lots of glistening six packs and things like that. Anyway, I remember one of the recordings I had was of Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which is obviously a cool film.
Quality.
And I remember, and I think I've told this story a few times, so I'm not going to go into the gory details, but the film had ended, and I thought, oh, I'm going to go to the bathroom, I'm going to go to the toilet. And I came back, and what my mum had obviously done was taped Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure on the back of Silence of the Lambs.
Right.
And it kind of like it was the part where Hannibal Lecter's been obviously imprisoned towards the end of the film, but then he's kind of flayed someone who's like, obviously you can't see what I'm doing on the podcast. I am acting this out. He's kind of attached to the bars with his guts hanging out, and that was quite interesting as a young, probably a bit younger than what I should have been watching those things. So that was always kind of an interesting thing. The last thing that I can remember sort of very early on was that I was really into sort of like R.L. Stein's Goosebumps books and things like that. And we used to kind of order them from whatever company that we had at school. I think it was like a Scholastic book series or whatever it was in the early 90s. And some of the books that you could order were like the true crime, true ghost stories, true horror stories. I think Terry Deary like wrote a lot of those alongside some of the horrible history stuff that he did. Nice. So I used to devour those, absolutely pore over anything related to that. And that kind of, I suppose those are kind of my formative experiences and kind of interest in that sort of thing. So it's a mixture of horror and true crime and kind of how they meld together. The last thing, sorry, I know I'm going on about this. This might be an edit for you. There was a magazine series called Spine Chillers that I collected. And I think there was so there was about 60 odd issues, and I wish I still had it. It was like in a lovely binder, and it was excellent. It was like it was absolutely amazing. But I collected that. I think it came out every maybe fortnightly, maybe. But within that you had fiction, but also you had like profiles of like true crime. So there was stuff on like Jack the Ripper. There was stuff on the Yorkshire Ripper, in fact. So some really kind of bleak case histories thrown amongst like, well, there's a story about vampires. There's also something about the Loch Ness Monster. So I think it was kind of all these weird esoteric kind of things mixed with a bit of true crime. This will be the last one. I promise. This again, I'm having a sort of a delve through memory lane here. I used to get my hair cut when I was a kid in a place called Jeff's Barbers, which was in Consett, County Durham, where I lived, right? And the reading material that Jeff had in his barbers was like the really hardcore bodybuilding magazines, so things like Flex, which is maybe another formative experience that's probably a time for another podcast on that. So.
That's another series there.
Yeah, it's another series. But also it was like true crime magazines. So things, I can't remember the titles. I mean, you can still get them now, but I remember reading about like Rose West when I was waiting to get my my head shaved when I was like 8 or 9. So like that was kind of like it was almost like not only was it like something I was interested in, but it kind of crept into my day-to-day experiences. Just like getting a haircut was informed, but it was like a true crime education when I was getting my haircut every month or something like that, So that's interesting. So a lot of formative experiences there, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I was building a vague theory that, I think, and then Shelley pointed out as well, it seems to get passed down through generations, certainly through women.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if like, the barber as some sort of like latent parental figure who can give you true crime content when you don't really need it. We've talked about this with horror. Me and Shelley talked about it as well. And true crime and horror, there's all the overlaps. And I think now we're seeing more overlaps with stuff that's about cryptids and conspiracy theory and stuff like that. And how when you're younger, it's got that illicit, I shouldn't be looking at this and I shouldn't be reading this. And, did little in the barbers that you shouldn't be reading an article about Rose West. Maybe this is an inappropriate place in which to have such a thing.
Yeah, I mean, I remember
aware of it when you were. I
mean, it was kind of like the barbershop was literally like it was round the corner from my house, and it was just a thing. Like my mum would give us like a £5, which is probably what it cost back then. I mean, it's ridiculous. Anyway, we're not going to salon prices and things like that. There's a £5. I'll see you in an hour or so, what have you. So just to go around and like, I think there was a sense that because I was obviously quite a voracious reader. I kind of knew the subject matter was maybe sort of quite obviously it wasn't what I was used to reading. Like I don't know, I was obviously buying comics and things like that then. So the Beano and the Dandy were very different to kind of the reading materials in this particular barbers, and it did kind of make me want to go back more often to kind of consume that kind of stuff. So it'd be like, I probably didn't need a haircut, but I'd say, oh, me cousin, or I think my auntie should probably send him. I'll go with him. Don't worry. You know what I mean? To kind of to finish the magazine or the issue that I had,
Yeah.
or that I'd started. So I think there was definitely this kind of, I knew it was maybe like, I suppose like the word taboo is maybe kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
appropriate there. I mean, so he had these magazines alongside like bodybuilding stuff, which was interesting, but also like I suppose lads mags of the time as
Hmm.
well. So it was all kind of like, so we're not going to call it literature, but like reading material that I wouldn't be exposed to otherwise, I guess. But that also sort of like makes me think, oh, was there lots of like true crime aficionados that were going to Jeff's Barbers? Because I didn't see that in any other place that I went to. It wasn't like in doctors' waiting rooms or anything like that. You know what I
No.
mean? So it's like, you know.
Certainly wasn't in the hairdressers that I used to go to, that my mum used to take me to. Not like that, it was just more things like Take a Break and
Yeah,
Bella,
yeah.
things like that. So you were a kid and you were finding all this stuff,
Yeah, yeah.
definitely overlapping with horror. There's lots of overlap, like say Silence of the Lambs, I guess is and Texas Chainsaw. They're the key examples of the overlap with horror. In terms of any true crime content that you engage with now, be it films or telly or podcasts or any of the fucking deluge of shit that's out there, is there anything that you shy away from or you don't engage with, or is it all fair game as far as you're concerned?
I think for me, it is kind of all fair game. I do think, you talk about this kind of deluge of content. I do think my attention span seems to wane a little bit with certain types of true crime media, and it
Hmm.
usually that responds to, I don't know if it's the type and tone of the program. And usually it's TV. It's kind of serialized
Hmm.
stories and narratives, or it might be like anthology stuff. I know you guys have been talking about, this idea of if a mystery's unsolved,
Yeah, does mine in.
there's a bit of disdain for that. And I do think there's a lot of programs that it's not like I'm suckered in. I kind of know very early on if it's not going to like sort of pan out the way, or like any kind of resolution. So it is kind of maybe not the glossy or glossier versions of true crime that you have on Netflix and obviously other streaming platforms. It might be your kind of, I don't know, your Channel 5 documentary
Yeah.
series, or I don't know, and they seem to be really kind of more exploitative maybe than other forms of the true crime media stuff that exists now. And I think once upon a time I would have really been drawn towards that,
Hmm.
because kind of I'm a fan of cheap and nasty things in various ways. I don't know what I'm trying to say there. Anyway, but yeah, I
Living that
think
in.
yeah, so yeah, leave it in. I think I don't like shy away from it, but I don't think I engage with it. I kind of, I'll put it on, I realize what it is, and then I might sort of say, right, I'd like to watch something else that's a bit
Yeah.
more kind of, I don't know, like holds my interest a little bit more, maybe. And I don't know if that's because it might not necessarily the big hitter cases and things that people are familiar with, but it might just be this random act that's happened somewhere that isn't really that interesting, and it's kind of like you've got all this kind of sensational aesthetics around that, and
Hmm.
it's just a bit like, oh, I kind of see what they're trying to do, but this is very bargain basement version of what this
Yeah.
kind of is. Do you know what I mean? I mean, there probably is a time and a place for that sort of stuff. Like, it's easy watching, it's kind of escapist, but I think when I am engaging with the true crime stuff, I like to be really, I tend to be really invested in the stuff that I'm interested in. And it's that kind of idea of like, people call it like armchair detection, and like, so usually if it's something interesting, I might be on my phone, I'll be looking at the details of it afterwards, or kind
All
of
right.
trying to complement my viewing maybe with other
More
information.
details.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so stuff like that.
Yeah, do I do that? I don't think so. I might go and have a little research afterwards and see if there was
Yeah,
anything that they missed or anything like that. So you said a key phrase there. You mentioned like the big hitters.
yeah,
So we've got the Bundys, the Gacy's, the Dahmers, all
yeah.
those types. But we know those stories inside out and upside down. If there's another Bundy documentary, another Dahmer documentary, are you going to watch those again, or are you done with them
I mean,
now?
I think for me, people like, who you've just mentioned, Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer. I do know about them. Obviously, I've read various sort of interpretations of their
Mhm.
crimes. I think more so now, and again, this might touch on something that you've already discussed on the podcast. I think it depends if we're getting new perspectives on these cases. So another example of that would be maybe Peter Sutcliffe, obviously the Yorkshire Ripper, who I know you've kind of mentioned on the
Mhm.
podcast already. And I remember, like, I think again I was probably wasn't that old, but there was this kind of there was a few kind of documentaries around about the Ripper case, focusing on the guy who it was like the hoax when the guy
Yeah,
from the
yeah,
northeast said he was responsible and things like that.
yeah,
And it was a bit of a curveball. I think it was it was like the Teesside or Tyneside Jack, something like that.
yeah.
And that was really interesting because I was like, oh, okay, so what does this case mean? What is it? And that like kind of fed into like I suppose I was interested in that case anyway, and read the sort of Red Riding trilogy, the David Peace
Hmm.
sort of work. Well, the trilogy was the films, and obviously I think it was the quintet was the book. So I read all that kind of stuff, which was like fictionalized accounts set alongside the kind of true case histories of that particular case. But again, it was kind of something that was very focused on, I suppose, ineptitude of the
Yeah.
Yorkshire police at the time and things like that. But in
Mm.
recent years, there seems to be a lot more focus on victims and
Yeah.
people who have been impacted and affected by those particular crimes. Again, this is something that you've talked about, like those perspectives. I haven't necessarily seen those cases through the eyes or the voices of
Yeah.
the people that were impacted. So that to me, again, adds that layer of intrigue and of interest that hasn't been sort of like voiced before, I guess. So I
Mhm.
think with that in mind, if there is another documentary on Bundy, on Dahmer, on Gacy, and also it depends who's kind of involved with that, because obviously, my interest in very specific cases, Joe Berlinger,
Mhm.
he's kind of the person who's driving, the Ted Bundy tapes, the Gacy tapes,
Yeah.
those kind of newish
Newish.
takes. Well, the new representations at least there, doesn't necessarily do anything different there. But yeah, so I think I'll watch them. I'll consume them
I'll keep
voraciously.
watching them.
But I guess, and I kind of understand that there might be a certain fatigue with that. It does really depend if there's kind of the new perspectives on that, because I think I'm not left very satisfied otherwise. I think for a general viewer maybe, but obviously people who are kind of invested into whatever degree of these particular cases, you need to have that new kind of perspective added to it, I think.
You do. I mean, so if you've got like a new perspective in, let's say, like Joe, is it Berlinger or Berlinger? I don't
I,
even
s-
know.
I, I say Berlinger, but I mean, I'm not sure. I think Berlinger would work fine.
Berlinger.
It's fine.
Um, so
Tomato,
yes,
tomato.
so he did his tapes trilogy over on Netflix. I remember when Conversations with the Killer Ted Bundy tapes came out. I think, as I was saying to Shelley, that was what reignited my interest in true
Yeah,
crime
yeah.
anyway, because I'd kind of left it alone for a while. It did feel like a new approach because we were hearing Bundy's exact words. I have many issues with the Conversations with the Killer tapes, certainly the Bundy one anyway. Many issues and many opinions. Yes, we were hearing from Bundy, but because he never admitted it, I think everybody would have preferred him to admit it. But like,
Yeah, yeah.
it just felt like he was rehashing the story.
Yeah, yeah.
Like it's like he was taking part in the thing that everybody was already starting to do, which was tell the Bundy story over and over again. It was kind of something new, but also something not new. So
Yeah.
again, this is an audio medium, so people can't see what I was doing, but I was reaching behind me for a notebook, and I was doing some research the other day on Joe
Yeah, yeah.
Berlinger and on his Conversations trilogy. I found an interesting article it was a Bloomberg article,
Okay.
and I'll link it in the show notes so folks can go and read it if they want. And the guy writing the article, so he's got some questions with Joe Berlinger, but the article isn't entirely about the interview. My impression from the interviewer is that he's not really a fan of
Right,
the
okay.
Ted Bundy tapes, and he'd asked Berlinger like, why, what are these doing that's worth people watching it for? Like, we already
Yeah.
know the story. Like, what's your point here? And Berlinger said that the John Wayne Gacy and the Jeffrey Dahmer tapes are about the attitudes towards the people of the time, allowing this killer to go free. So Berlinger's making the point that those two tapes, Gacy and Dahmer, Gacy and Dahmer, say it the way around. They're sort of investigating the context.
Yeah.
And then and I think those two, they are quite different to the Ted Bundy tapes, because Gacy and Dahmer tapes, they do investigate what was going on at the time and how did they get away with it for so long. But the Bundy tapes, it just seems to be Bundy talking about how much of a magnificent killer he was,
Yeah.
or they were. So when Berlinger's asked, like, what do your Ted Bundy tapes offer them? And his reasoning is, he said he did it because he asked his daughter, do you know who Ted Bundy is? And the daughter said no. And he either asked his other daughter or he asked his daughter's friends, and they didn't know who Bundy were. So he said he made the Ted Bundy tapes because the lesson that just because somebody looks and acts a certain way, this is a quote, just because somebody looks and acts a certain way, just because somebody is charming and good looking, it doesn't mean that you should trust them. End quote. So
Mm.
you were saying, I made the Ted Bundy tapes because I felt that there was still a lesson there that
Right,
people
okay.
should trust someone, even if you shouldn't trust them.
Yeah.
Like Ted Bundy he had some charm about him, I suppose.
Yeah.
That, yeah, great thing to say, but that's how he did it. And
Yeah.
So you were saying that there was a lesson to be learned, and it's the same lesson that's been taught for generations, particularly to young women. Like, don't trust
Yeah.
someone just because they're nice and because they're charming. So on the one hand, I agree with him. That is a lesson that we should be teaching everyone. As far as Berlinger's point of view on it, it felt like a bit of a reach
Yeah.
for him. But then, you know, like me and Shelley have said, there could be another Bundy documentary coming out tonight, and I'm going to watch it. And
Yeah.
I've seen them all, and I do return to them over and over again. So do you return to stories, the same stories over and over again?
Yeah, I mean, there's one particular case. So obviously, we talk about this a bit later on as well. I think a lot of my early research around it was kind of around documentary and forms of documentary initially, and obviously, I know you guys are kind of talking about the body of theory and kind of. I think Shelley framed it as like the history of documentary is so vast that there's literally so much out there that it's an absolute minefield. And I mean, when I started doing research into it, I was like, oh, I totally underestimated how difficult and dry. I think dry is the word. Like, it's really, really intense. And like, you know, I was like, right, could someone just kind of surmise this for me, and that would be absolutely amazing. So actually, I'll not talk about the West Memphis Three just yet. So one of the cases that I was really interested in, and this was when I was at university. So this is a shout out to one of my old lecturers, Rosie White, who I'll send her the link to the podcast so she can listen to it, like, if she wants to. She's since retired. She used to do, so I did film and English literature at university. One of the modules that we did was a kind of amalgamation of different forms of media, so film, literature, comics, and kind of pulp novels and things like that. And it was about I think it was called Violent Femmes, Women in Post-War Culture, right? One of the topics that we looked at was the figure of Eileen Warnos, obviously the female serial killer. I think she was kind of the tabloidization of that was like the first American female serial killer, which wasn't true, but that was kind of what was said in the kind of rhetoric around that. So we watched the Nick Broomfield documentaries, which was Selling of a Serial Killer and Life and Death of a Serial Killer. I think it came out fairly recently, actually, at that particular time. So this is around 2005, 2006, might have been 2007, around that kind of that area. So that was the case studies that we were watching in university and kind of discussing this idea of what it meant to be a woman who was killing, and obviously she was a sex worker. She murdered. The debate was around whether it was in self-defense or was it premeditated and all this kind of stuff. And obviously the documentaries were about how her life story, her case was effectively being sold to the highest bidder, which obviously went on to be an Oscar-winning Hollywood film and all this kind of stuff. But at the time, obviously, it was you've mentioned her on this podcast, actually. I think you talked about her book, Justice on Demand, Tanya Horek.
Yeah.
She wrote a really excellent article in Screen, the film journal, which was comparing the kind of representations of Eileen Warnos in the Nick Broomfield documentaries with the film Monster that had obviously just kind of came out, and the Oscar buzz around that, and kind of the representation of Eileen Warnos in particular, kind of her relationships, queer relationships and things like that. So that was a case I was really invested in, basically because, for all intents and purposes, I had to write about it for an assessment at university. But I just thought that idea of, a female serial killer, because I've been reading about, I suppose, the bigger American killers that are noted. You've got Bundy, Gacy, Dahmer, Ed Gein, we've talked about. There seemed to be something different. And the way that it was kind of contextualized was really different. And I think there was a lot of kind of feminist discourse around that, talking about the problematic ways in which Eileen Warnos as a quite a vulnerable woman was being portrayed in the media. So that was really interesting. And I kind of still revisit that from time to time, because I think the Nick Broomfield documentaries in terms of ethics of representation are really interesting, in the way that he kind of draws information from Eileen as a kind of a figure or participant in those films is really cool. Problematic, but definitely interesting. And I use that in teaching quite a lot. So that was kind of one of the first cases that I was going back to.
Yeah.
Time and time again. And there's a certain degree of finality to that case as well, because, Eileen, she was executed in the sort of mid 2000s, I guess, following various appeals and things like that. So that was kind of the first case that I was going back to. And that kind of, influenced my obsession with the West Memphis Three case as well.
Yeah.
I think Shelley had mentioned that on the episode that you did a few episodes ago, and that I suppose that's interesting because that originated from, I remember reading about it in Kerrang magazine of all places. It was weird. So this is kind of where I suppose my interest in music and horror and true crime kind of coalesce.
Yeah.
So
In
it's
the Venn
almost
diagram.
it's like a perfect storm of kind of things going on. It was a Black Flag benefit CD for the West Memphis Three that kind of drew my attention, being a massive fan of that particular band. That they got various members back together to cover various songs with other famous musicians, like people like Lemmy from Motorhead and Cedric Bixler from At the Drive-In and things like that. So that was, a young Tom Watson was very, very heavily engaged in that. And then I saw the films. I kind of, it kind of spoke to me because those three young guys at the time were kind of, they listened to the same music that I did.
Oh, yeah.
They read the same stuff, which was true for a lot of people, I guess.
Yeah, we recognize yourself in those lads.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, go on, carry on.
Yeah, so I mean, so it's kind of reading about them. I got the first two Paradise Lost movies, and obviously there's where our friend Joe Berlinger comes back.
He's going to come back a lot.
Back in the mix, and obviously he was collaborating with Bruce Sinofsky, who sadly died a few years ago. So the two filmmakers involved in that. Though that case, when it was the kind of the documentary, at least, seemed to be this really sort of raw portrait of both kind of the victims and their families, but also the three young lads that had been kind of accused of this kind of brutal triple homicide of these three young 8-year-old boys. I think at the time they were 8, and it was a really kind of raw, like I said, raw kind of representation of that. But the first documentary, at least, the child murders at Robin Hood Hills, obviously where it took place. I don't know if I've ever seen anything like it since, because the level of access that the filmmakers have to this kind of community and what they're trying to do. Because I think there was a lot of kind of skepticism around these filmmakers from HBO commissioned to kind of do this documentary about an article that they read in a newspaper. So they kind of descended upon this very kind of, eccentric community, shall we say, various characters within that. But again, it spoke to me because I thought, well, that could be me.
Yeah.
Wrong place, the wrong time. In that documentary, the first one became this kind of, I don't know, it was like an advocacy film, I guess, which it did go on to be. And that was something, the first two films in particular was something that I revisited. Like I started this very lengthy response talking about my interest in documentary. And that was something that I was researching when I was doing my PhD. And I remember saying to my supervisor, Steve Jones from Northumbria, like, I want to write about these films. And basically said, well, how quickly can you write me a chapter on that? And I was like, because I was so invested in it.
Yeah.
And so kind of, and I don't think I've ever been, I mean, I probably shouldn't say this, but like as forensic with my research or rigorous before or since. And I think it was because maybe it did relate to at that point, an ongoing case that I did. Not that, not that lots of people are going to read what I write, which is fine. Do you know what I mean? It's not going to have. It's not going to have like the impact of like a HBO documentary, shall we say? But it was kind of, I'm kind of almost interjecting into that narrative that's developing by commenting on that. And I'm sure like a lot of people might have been conscious of that as well. So it was really, I watched those films probably, I don't know, like hundreds of times. And scoured all of it was really interesting at the time because there was a website. I don't think it's there anymore now, but
it's gone. I tried to find it.
It's like an evidence sort of like absolute sort of like, it was like an archive of evidence.
Yeah.
But again, it was kind of, you could read things alongside the documentary and like what was included and what wasn't. So that was really good. So the Paradise Lost films, in the case of the West Memphis Three, is probably the biggest revisit that I do. I haven't revisited for a while, and I think that's because, kind of spoiler alert, the West Memphis Three were released from prison after 18 years and seem to be kind of going about their lives as they are at the moment.
The mind boggles, doesn't it? About a year ago, I was on everybody's favorite knockoff t-shirt site, Redbubble.
Excellent.
A few months ago, and I just wanted a new t-shirt. Somebody was selling t-shirts with the print of the West Memphis Three
cool.
poster
awesome.
on it.
Yeah,
exactly. That was my response. I was like, I'm having one of them. So I sent my order off to Redbubble. The money went off my card, and then I got an email a couple of days later And I didn't save the email, and I should have done because it was hilarious. But it was saying something like, "We're not allowed to print this T-shirt because
Oh
it's,
wow,
don't
okay.
know, I can't remember the phrase they use. That's really annoying. But basically, like, they don't print anything that's too, I don't know, controversial or
Yeah,
political
okay.
or whatever." And I was
Yeah.
just like, "Oh, my T-shirt." They gave me my money back, but yeah, there was like, "We'll take
That's
it off the
interesting.
site then." But I
Yeah, I was
really,
gonna say it probably shouldn't be on the site. Yeah.
yeah, but I really,
Yeah.
really wanted it. The other thing I was going to say, then I've forgotten. Ah, damn it. So he's like, you mentioned, is there been any other documentary that's kind of gone into this in the same way? And the only thing that I can think of that has maybe like a somewhere near the amount of access that
Yeah.
that Joe Berlinger got with the West Memphis Three is with the staircase.
Oh yes, of
So,
course.
so
Yeah,
they're with
yeah, yeah.
Peterson all the time. They're
Yeah, yeah.
sat in them in like meetings with the lawyers, so that they
Yeah.
get a lot of access. I don't think they get quite as much access as they do in the Paradise Lost films, but I think that's the only other thing that I can think of where we've got a similar,
Yeah.
well, not a similar situation. The crime is wildly different, but I mean a situation of the
Yeah.
documentary filmmakers being there during the process of trying to get somebody
Yeah.
convicted. While we're at the West Memphis Three, can't even say it. West Memphis Three. We should talk about it then. So,
Yeah,
just
okay.
in case people don't know, in 1993 in West Memphis, in Arkansas, three 8-year-old boys were found brutally murdered. We can't
Yeah.
stress enough how horrible the crime was. So, three 8-year-old boys found murdered, and then three, 17 to 18-year-old boys were charged with the murder, and
Yeah.
all evidence was circumstantial at best, if that
Yeah,
even
yeah.
existed. So Jesse Miss Kelly, Jason Baldwin, and Damien Echols, all three of those lads were tried and convicted of murder. Damien Echols was put on death row. And if it wasn't for, Berlinger's Paradise Lost documentary and all of those rock artists that you
Yeah.
mentioned and others, and Peter Jackson of Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings
Yeah,
fame, if it
yeah.
wasn't for them getting involved, Damien Echols would be dead
Yeah.
right now. Like
Mm.
death row would have taken its toll and he would have died. So you've written, about the case as much as anybody else, I reckon, as much as everybody else. So you wrote a chapter on it. I just wanted to sort of ask you generally
Yeah,
about.
yeah.
So we've talked about what brought you to the case, and it was that these three lads, they were convicted of the murder because they basically, there was a guy, it was called Gary Gitchell, just had a fucking bug up his arse and he didn't like
Yeah,
these
yeah.
lads, and he went for them because they had two of them, not even all three of them, had Metallica t-shirts, and
Yeah, yeah.
that's it. So it's all on the back of the Satanic Panic. So can you tell us then about what you've done in terms of your research with that case? So you mentioned you wrote a chapter.
Yeah.
What did you write about?
So yeah,
Tell us.
so obviously my chapter when I was writing that, there's three films in. I don't think it's ever been referred to as like a trilogy per
No.
se, but I'm gonna call it the Paradise Lost trilogy. So you've got three films. You've got the first film, which is kind of shot in and around the sort of very early trials of those who were charged with those murders. So like we've already talked about the kind of level of access that the filmmakers got to both the those accused and their families, but also to the victims' families and various people, the police officers, prosecutors, the defense attorneys, and all this kind of stuff, getting their
Yeah.
perspectives. It's really
Everyone.
kind of, yeah, like literally everyone who was engaged within that case. Journalists. I mean, I ended up speaking to some journalists after the fact. Probably like I was writing about it probably 15, 20-ish years after the initial kind of murders. And the journalist that I was speaking to was a lady called Mara Leverett, who wrote the book Devil's Knot about the
Oh
case,
yeah.
which was later adapted into, I think it was Atta Margoyan adapted it into a sort of a feature, which
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk about because I don't think it's very good. Like,
No.
actually doesn't necessarily do anything, but that's interesting because it's like I had to watch that. It
Yeah.
doesn't add anything to the case, but it's still a representation that maybe clouds and muddies the water, so to speak. So there's always a risk of other documentaries and other films kind of doing that. And I know you're interested in the way that certain cases are kind of explicated across different forms
Yeah.
of media. So it's an interesting example of that. But the journalists who are kind of talking about that and reflecting on their experiences and the people that they were coming across, and it was almost like some of these people that were involved in the case and the case history were like kind of very performative for Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky when they landed in West Memphis, Arkansas. And I was always really interested initially got into the case because of that level of performativity.
Yeah.
And so there's one particular guy in the first, well, he's in all of the films. He's since passed away as well, sadly. He's the stepfather of one of the murdered children. a guy called John Mark Byers.
Is he died? I didn't know he was.
Yeah, well, it wasn't that long ago,
Oh,
actually. Yeah, I'm not sure in the circumstances.
right.
I'm suppose he might be quite old by this point, actually.
Yeah.
But he was this very imposing kind of figure who was very performative, very theatrical. The way that Berlinger and Sanofsky would kind of talk about it was like they'd turn the camera on, this guy would act a certain way, and then when the cameras, he would kind of be divulging very suspect information about the case, and he was kind of a suspect for a while, you know. So that was quite interesting. So I was kind of interested in the way that the documentary kind of functioned to outline all of these really sort of ethically problematic concerns around a very real ongoing criminal case. So that was part of the chapter that I wrote, was like what these films were trying to do, what Berlinger and Sanofsky were attempting to do with their film. The first one, at least, we're talking about it as this advocacy film.
Yeah.
The second film is really interesting because it's almost a portrait of that advocacy in the initial kind of interactions that people were having with the first film. So that's when you kind of get all your musicians who were involved. I mean, in the first film, Metallica, for example, did the soundtrack. They're kind of involved in promoting the West Memphis Three kind of, I guess, image that unfortunately you weren't able to secure with your t-shirt purchase, Stella. But then you had people like what's he called? Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam is very much involved in the case by this point. He's talking about it at shows. He's doing benefit gigs to fund appeal hearings and all of this kind of stuff. The Paradise Lost documentary, the second one, it's called Revelations. So you do get this kind of, it's not the best film in that nothing really has happened in the case. Beyond this kind, it's almost a film about the reaction to the first film. So you kind of get the guys who ran Callahan, the website, collating all of this evidence to kind of try and prove the innocence of those that were convicted. It's talking about the potential guilt of family members.
Yeah.
But to me, part of my work around these films, it wasn't necessarily letting Berlinger and Sanofsky off the hook either. Because I think in a lot of ways, you know, what they were trying to do is admirable. It's kind of honourable. You know, they firmly believe that these young lads didn't commit the crimes that they were accused for. But I do think there's a certain level of guilt almost in the way that Berlinger and Sanofsky portray some of the people that they did try, not like shift the blame, shift responsibility, but they were kind of guilty of doing what the press were doing to the three lads that were convicted to the other family members. So my chapter kind of investigates that a little bit.
Yeah.
It sort of says, well, are you actually doing what you were doing, like the advocacy at the expense of other people, which I think they kind of were, and maybe had to kind of get it to be, you know, in front of people, I think. But
I've certainly seen the first one a number of times, and I think I've only seen the second and third one once. And don't they pretty much in the second film say that it's Byers?
Well, that's it. I mean,
pretty much come out and say it.
Yeah, it becomes this kind of.
It's not.
It wasn't. No. So there's like sequences in the film when they've got him on a lie detector, because I think between the first film and the second film, John Byers, it was the mother of Christopher Byers. So John Byers was the stepfather. The mother of Christopher Byers has kind of mysteriously died, and that doesn't ever seem to be explained. So they do kind of almost shift responsibility of that death onto John Mark Byers as well, which again I think is very questionable. It is quite problematic to do that. So they've kind of got him on like lie detectors and asking him things that it doesn't always work out in his favor, shall we say. But again, by this point, I think the other thing is they're kind of paying John Mark Byers to be involved in these kind of projects as well. So it's like there are these kind of other ethical implications that kind of again muddy the water, so to speak. And by the third film, Paradise Lost Purgatory, which is a great name. All these kind of like religious connotations are great as well. You kind of get towards the end of the case where to a point that you mentioned before you said about Damien Echols, he would have been dead had these films not existed. And I think in the third film he kind of says, you know, if it wasn't for you guys, if it wasn't for the films that you created and the awareness that you created, I wouldn't be anything but a memory right now. And that was something that I thought was really poignant, really important, and quite powerful in terms of what these documentaries are actually doing. Because I think alongside this, you kind of had documentaries like the Thin Blue Line with Errol Morris, and how that was working to get someone who was incarcerated, who was innocent. So the third film in the Paradise Lost series, kind of, it's towards the end of the case. However, the same time, you've got Peter Jackson and Amy Berg's documentary West of Memphis, which is kind of being filmed parallel to what Berlinger and Sanofsky are doing. So the end of my chapter kind of talks about this idea that there's almost kind of a sense of ownership over the narrative, over the story, and there's sort of like a level of truth or kind of falsity, which is also implicated in that, because Peter Jackson had basically been funding on the back of Berlinger and Sanofsky, seeing this case play out.
Yeah.
He'd been funding a lot of Damien Echols as like sort of appeal hearings and all that kind of stuff. Yeah,
he used loads of his Lord of the Rings money.
Yeah. So I mean that there's this there's this hidden history going on there, and obviously Amy Berg makes this film. But within that film, you've kind of got participants who were paid to then not appear in the Paradise Lost films.
Yeah.
So then Berlinger and Sanofsky are kind of, they're not happy about that because they've kind of started this narrative, and then it's kind of like it's almost like a warring factions about who can tell this story. And that to me is also, I mean, it's not necessarily for the detriment of the West Memphis Three, who were later, they weren't exonerated, they are guilty in the eyes of the law, they are guilty murderers. They've just kind of been released for time served. The questionable Alfred plea,
which they did in The Staircase, which Sal Peterson got out. He took it as well.
It's an interesting one, that. I admit guilt, but I will be released. But that also means that I can't sue anyone for wrongful imprisonment. Yeah, there's something politically dubious about that, I think.
It's odd. Yeah. It's really odd. It does take some mental gymnastics to get your head around. The best explanation I've seen of it actually was in The Staircase, the HBO drama.
Yeah.
Of that. So the episode where they get to that, obviously quite near the end, possibly the final. Is it not? I don't think it's the final episode. The one before the final episode, penultimate, that's the word on, isn't it? They're explaining the Alpha play, and they just break it down to Colin Firth, who plays Peterson, and plays him fucking brilliantly as well.
Yeah.
Because they had to explain it in a drama to perhaps, even though it's HBO, to slightly dumb it down. I think that was the only time that I've been watching something that deals with that play, and I've just been like, oh, right, I get it, I think. But yeah, it took a screenwriter to dumb it down.
It's an interesting one. I know, like with the West Memphis Three stuff, they had like this big press conference where you've got Jason Baldwin, Jesse Miskelly, and Damien Echols, and I think it's Jason Baldwin who literally says, look, I'm innocent, I didn't do anything, but there's no, well, I'm paraphrasing at best, he obviously doesn't talk like this. He's like, I've done 18 years in jail. Like, Damien is going to die at some point, so I accept this. It's like a bargain. That's what it's kind of framed as. I accept this because we need to have lives outside of this, basically.
Yeah.
Which I think it's a really sort of, again, I suppose the image that lasts of that for me is I think it's Jason Baldwin on a park bench with Berlinger and Sanofsky, and they've got I don't know, it might be the Arkansas Times. It's one of the publications, but it says like 3 walk free. Which is really sort of, and if you contrast that to the mugshots of them, that's kind of been iconic of the case. It's sort of, it's very interesting.
A t-shirt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure.
A t-shirt,
I'm sure. I mean, it's not necessarily in the realms of murderabilia, so to speak, but I'm sure there might be a vintage one on eBay at some point
somewhere,
potentially. Yeah.
Imagine turning up with that somewhere. I'm at a conference. I've come to do a serious paper, and I'm gonna whip that t-shirt.
Yeah. It's pretty interesting. It's interesting there that you talk about, because I haven't seen the dramatization of The Staircase, but Colin Firth is also one of the leads in Devil's Knot. I think he plays. So maybe Colin Firth's got this kind of niche. He's in the dramatizations of these kind of very interesting true crime cases. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, I don't know. Next time I see him, I'll ask him.
Get on to him. Bring him now.
I'll just give him a bell. Yeah, I'll just WhatsApp him. The West Memphis Three is the case that I've gone back to as well. So, like I said, I've seen the first Paradise Lost film several times. I started watching it again last night.
Oh, okay.
And I got about halfway through because I'd forgotten how fucking long it is. It's like 2.5 hours. Yeah. It's really long. After about an hour, I was like...
The thing that's really interesting about that, I think I mentioned this in the chapter, was like, you've got this really long film that is literally edited from hundreds of hours of like,
God,
obviously
yeah.
as documentaries are, but
Yeah.
like literally hundreds of hours of footage. But also, I think they had access to all of the court transcripts and recordings, so it's hundreds, probably like 500 hours worth of like audio, which
Doesn't bear
is
thinking about.
it's insane. Like, yeah,
I mean, I whinge at doing these and I'll have like an hour's worth of
yeah,
filing Audacity. And I'm just like, oh God. Oh, no. So Damien Echols, I said, I've revisited it. I've watched the
yeah,
Devil's
yeah.
Not film with Colin Firth and who plays the woman?
It's Reese Witherspoon. Yeah, that's right.
Reese Witherspoon, which
Yeah,
is
yeah,
also an odd casting. And I did read Mara Leverett's book, The
yeah.
Devil's Not, but it's a dense book, that one.
Hmm.
That takes a
Yeah, yeah.
concentration. That
It's
I think
very forensic.
I read
Yeah,
that over a long period of time. Like I'd read a
yeah.
bit and then put it down. And I think my favorite my favorite one is Damien Eccles' book, Life
Oh
After
yes,
Death,
yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah, yeah,
because just it's his tale of it all,
yeah,
but the amount that he puts on what it's like to be on death row.
yeah,
There's so much of that which is just haunting
yeah,
beyond belief. And I know there's a couple of other podcasts that have covered this, and like the last podcast on the left, they
yeah,
do an excellent 3-part series on the West Memphis Three, which is
yeah,
well worth looking at or listening to rather. And they bring in Damien Eccles' book quite a lot. And there's a couple of pieces in the book that they mention. There's also worth a mention, like again here with Eccles talking about how there was a guy who was on death row with him, and he was a guy who was there because of guilt through association. So he didn't actually pull
mm,
the trigger, but somebody else did. But because he
yeah,
did nothing to stop it, he was also guilty, however they want to categorize it. So him and the guy who actually did the murder, they were executed on the same day.
yeah,
And Eccles is saying, the guy who was guilt by association, that he gave Damien all of his meager possessions,
yeah,
like maybe bits of book or note paper or whatever. And, for Damien, that was rough for everybody that day, but that really stuck in Damien's mind,
yeah.
as did, and one of the cells that Damien Eccles was in, there was the last guy who'd been in there had drawn an outline of himself
All
on
right,
the
okay, yeah,
wall. And Damien said, and that's all that remained of this guy because he's been executed, which is why
yeah,
Damien got his cell. And he's just sit and stare at this outline of this guy who's now
yeah.
dead. It's just like, I can't even begin to.
It's unfathomable, really.
It's
I mean,
fucking wild.
yeah, I mean, yeah. I suppose that the memoir. I totally forgot about the Eccles book. Actually, now that you mention
It's
it, yeah,
great.
it's really haunting.
Hmm.
I think Mara Leverett wrote one not in conjunction, in collaboration, shall we say,
Hmm.
with Jason Baldwin as well, which is a similar kind of,
All right.
it's like a
I'll have a
tale
look
of
for that.
his experiences, obviously being incarcerated and things like that. I think the afterlife, that sounds ridiculous. Post prison, shall we say, for Damien Eccles has been really interesting because
Hmm.
he's kind of got this, I don't know, like what I follow him on Instagram, he seems to be this
Yeah.
kind of it's like, I don't know what martial art it is. I don't know if it's like Taekwondo. He's a very kind of enthusiastic teacher of martial arts, but also kind of, I guess, like tarot and like other these like sort of
Yeah.
esoteric kind of
It's into like
um
magical thinking and stuff, isn't
yeah,
it?
so that's kind of, I think that's kind of what he's developed. I think he went through his time in prison. I'm sure he was a Buddhist at one point,
Hmm.
and then he's kind of went through all these kind of almost spiritual reawakenings,
Yeah.
which I don't, his book talks about in a lot of detail as well,
Yeah.
which is really interesting.
The thing he held on to not go completely fucking nuts. Like,
Well, this is it,
and
yeah,
and that's the thing that I said. I was watching Paradise Lost last night, and I know these lads were very young, but certainly the footage of Jason Baldwin,
yeah,
he's 17, but he's like
yeah,
he looks 12. It's like what
yeah.
the fuck is he doing?
It's an
Standing a
interesting
murder
one
charge.
for the Jason Baldwin stuff, because I think during the trials, so Jesse Miskelly's kind of encouraged not to say anything
Yeah.
during his defense.
Yeah, it's like keep your head down.
Yeah, just literally just don't say anything. So I think his defense lawyer was a guy called Dan Stidham, who was very kind of, very kind of like a nice, well-meaning guy,
Hmm.
but maybe not as kind of ruthless as what a defense
What he
might have needed
needed.
to be for that. Obviously, because
Yeah.
it got a life imprisonment for the crime. But it was interesting that Jason Baldwin, well, as the documentary's kind of represented anyway, so Damien's the only guy that testifies,
Yeah.
and sort of questioned, and obviously it's all about satanic sort of
Yeah.
interests in books of like,
Because he's got notebooks with pentagrams on it,
yeah,
so he
but
must
it's
have done it. So
well,
fuck off.
this is it, yeah, and like talking about evil and like, but basically, I think it's a guy. Oh, I can't remember who the prosecutor is, but he's a guy, and basically says like, if you read horror, you watch horror, you like heavy metal music. He sort of says like those things separately are fine, but when you combine them, it's like
Oh,
you've got these brutal child killers, and I was like, what? what
What?
how does that kind of stand up anywhere, you know?
How
Um,
ridiculous. And if
but
that's the
yeah,
case, then,
yeah.
how many murders have we committed?
Well, that's exactly it. I
We'll
mean,
never know.
I remember talking to my I was starting my PhD. I remember having a conversation with my mother about it, and she was kind of like, "Well, if anyone comes into your study and sees the films and books that you've got, like, they're just that will be it. There wouldn't be
That's
any
it, yeah.
questions." You know what I mean? And I think that was kind of what I mean, even as like a younger kid, like reading about it initially in Kerrang magazine, it was
Yeah,
like, this is kind of, and I think that was obviously why it was relevant to Kerrang. Was like, well,
of
this is a
course.
story
Yeah.
about our readers potentially, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Jason Baldwin looks like a 12-year-old
Yeah,
kid,
it's so tiny.
and he's the only one in the films when the judge sort of says like, "Why is there any reason why we shouldn't imprison you?" And he says, "Because I'm innocent. Like I
Yeah,
didn't
because
do this." He's the only one that kind of, well, I think his attorneys have kind of told him to maybe say that, but
Mhm.
he's the only person that's protesting his innocence, which
Yeah,
which is quite interesting, I think.
the whole thing is just fucked from
It's it's
start to
it's
finish.
it's absolutely crazy. I mean, there was an anniversary of how long they'd been released recently, or some kind of anniversary, which made me again think about the case and again revisit it. So I thought, oh, okay,
Yeah,
so they've been out so long now as well, or approaching kind of an anniversary of
yeah.
that. I think they got released in 2011. So yeah, it's probably about 15 or so years ish, maybe next year when the, well, I don't think my maths is right there, but do you know what I mean? It's quite a significant period of time that they've been out, you know?
I think that was that case as well. It was one of the first ones that I think I became particularly mad about death row or the
Yeah,
idea of, capital punishment anyway.
yeah,
That case taught me a lot about how even if you haven't done it,
yeah,
everything can still go fucking wrong.
yeah,
And it's just like, wow. I think it's on the last podcast on the left, one of them says something along the lines of the things that the prosecution was saying were
yeah,
so outrageous
mhm,
that it was almost like it had gone through a circle of like, well, it's so outrageous, so they can't possibly be making it up.
yeah, yeah,
Must be true in order to say these
yeah,
things,
yeah,
because
yeah,
otherwise, where would it come from? Because it was so wild, the stuff that they were claiming.
yeah,
They're Satanists and they're doing orgies and
yeah, yeah,
all those kinds of things. It's like, so it must be true because it was so outlandish. Like it had gone past that line of being like, you sure? It's like, well,
yeah,
why would you say that otherwise?
yeah.
I will link the films, the Paradise Lost films. I'll link the Devil's Not book, the Devil's Not film. I'll link Echols book, and I'll link your chapter
Oh,
in the
thank
show
you.
notes
I
so
appreciate
people
that.
can go and
Read
find
all
out about
about
it.
it.
Read all about it, yeah. So the three Paradise Lost films are currently on Now TV, if anybody's got that. They're probably in bits on YouTube as well, I would imagine.
Yeah, there will be. I.
They're always there kicking around. I think you kind of mentioned it before. I was going to ask you, what else has changed, or what do you think's changed in true crime? And you talked about different perspectives,
Yeah, yeah,
hearing from the victims. What do we learn from true crime, if true crime content, if anything? So, I'd said I kind of learned that the justice system isn't necessarily fair or
yeah.
right all the time. What have you learned?
I mean, I think touching upon that as well. Again, I suppose I've talked about Eileen Warnos as being a case I was kind of obsessed with for a long time. So the Nick Broomfield documentaries and kind of the Tanya Horek work that she did on
Yeah.
those films, and obviously the Charlize Theron Hollywood sort of reimagining of that particular case. And obviously, like the West Memphis Three stuff, I was always interested in kind of this idea of, these films are almost not that Nick Broomfield was advocating innocence of Eileen Warner. She did kill those men. Obviously, there was disputes around the reasoning or circumstances in which that did actually happen, or whether
Mm.
it is indeed murder, if it's self-defense and all that kind of stuff. But I think for me, what I learned, especially in relation to those cases, and it's something that I don't necessarily know where I would get that information from otherwise, is
Yeah.
it's probably about the American judicial system
Yeah.
at those particular times. And like there's a lot of rhetoric around Nick Broomfield's film, and he talks about like Eileen Warnos being this very unwell,
Hmm.
sort of mentally unwell person,
Yeah.
vulnerable woman within this kind of system, and the fact that there doesn't seem to be any engagement or allowance for that there needs to be some kind of either overhaul or kind of some kind of intervention within those systems. And especially, like with the Paradise Lost stuff. I mean, you reminded me there, obviously, Damien Echols, when he was on death row, Werner Herzog did a film, Into the Abyss, and that was a documentary that he also did alongside, I think it was a television serial kind of program where he had different killers or different criminals who were on death row for various reasons. And there was this really kind of cold, almost detached approach to them. And it was almost like, I'm looking at you on the screen now, that would be like the interview of the film, would be the person talking to the camera about their crime. Werner Herzog would be this kind of disembodied voice off screen, asking these people about their crime. And it was kind of to point out innocent people are kind of executed for whatever reasons they've been incarcerated for. And these pardons that come after the fact and the compensation for families, it's like, that's always boggled my mind. It's like, that seems to be okay. Is that it's not acceptable. I'm sure the families don't accept that either.
No.
But legally that's okay to do. Like, we wrongfully executed someone.
Sorry.
We'll give you however much money and that to me is a really sort of like cynical, cold, detached process.
It feels like a slap in the face to me. It's like, like, soz.
So I think the more certain sort of documentaries and cases and books and kind of podcasts that do those deep dives, I think they're all kind of for a particular reason. And I think what I learned from that is I mean, a lot of this, it's entertainment at the end of the day, however cynical that is. But a lot of the kind of the podcasts that I've listened to, and it'll be the main ones, to be honest, talking the main, like things like Serial or S-Town was one that I really enjoyed. But it was kind of outlining how batshit crazy a lot of these processes are. And I'm like, wow, like, did that actually happen? It's like, it's almost like I'm verifying that did happen. It's like, yeah, that did happen. That person was accused of this. They were executed. And then their family was later compensated 25 years later because they found new DNA somewhere. And it's like, how does that happen?
So how can you have a system of capital punishment?
Yeah.
If even one person is executed when they're innocent, and that just makes the rest of it completely redundant.
This is exactly it. Yeah. I think that's kind of what I'm taking away from that. I mean, that's as well with the Paradise Lost stuff. It's kind of like how powerful, these documentaries could be. Because I mean, I know the first film's like, and especially in an age, before the internet as it exists now, like, Paradise Lost first film, you're talking 1996 comes out, general release. It's not like it's on YouTube the next week. People aren't necessarily finding out about it. So it was kind of this real grassroots, I don't want to say DIY movement, but like there's probably pockets of that within that.
Oh, for sure, definitely. Like it's an excellent advert for action. Like this thing has happened, it's bollocks. So if enough people do something about it, then sometimes things can be changed and rectified. But like like you said before, like 18 years in prison, like they're never going to get that back. And there's still people who think they did it.
Yeah. Well, that case, like, I mean, as it stands, I suppose because of the Alfred plea bargain that those guys accepted, that case is like closed.
Yeah, it's closed.
Like, they are guilty. They're not like. I mean, that was it. So I think recently there was kind of this thing about they found some new evidence.
Some DNA evidence. Yeah.
That was right.
Like, oh no, case is closed.
But it's like, legally
it's boxed off.
Yeah. So that to me is also nuts. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's like So whoever did murder these, like I said, 3 boys, brutally killed.
Yeah.
Whoever did do it, they've done all right.
Doesn't matter. Effectively. Doesn't matter. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, we've closed the book on it, and it's just like, very frustrating.
Yeah.
And while we've got the story of the West Memphis Three being freed, we don't have the story of the families of those murdered boys. Yeah. What do they get?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They'll never know who did it. They'll never feel any sense of justice.
Yeah.
In a statement given to the police and obtained by a Memphis newspaper, 17-year-old Jesse Miskelly allegedly confesses to watching 2 other suspects choke, rape, and sexually mutilate 3 West Memphis second graders.
The murders had been part of a satanic ritual.
Satanic worship.
A horrific, ritualistic sacrifice.
We were just sitting on the couch watching TV the night we were arrested.
They had to find somebody to pin this on. This club lister was getting out of hand.
We, the jury, find Jesse Lloyd Miskelly Jr. guilty of second-degree murder, Jason Baldwin guilty of capital murder, Damian Echols guilty of capital murder.
This doesn't change anything.
Our son was still murdered.
Dead.
Our son
and he was tortured to death by 3 murdering bastards on a ditch bank. He was 8 years old.
Damn system stinks.
It's a great tragedy that kids was killed, but it's also another great tragedy that American citizens, anybody, today's public, can just be picked up for a crime they didn't commit.
Everybody in the town and in the courtroom and on the jury are all blinded by their fantasies about satanic cults.
The criminal confessions are too many manipulated by the police.
I'm going to be wondering if the true killers were actually captured.
Jesse Miskelly Jr., Jason Baldwin, Damian Echols. I promise you, as God is my witness, I'll visit all three of your graves.
So I've come to the end of the questions, I think. Yep, checking them again. I've come to the end of the questions. Is there anything else that you want to add to this?
I'm not sure if there's anything necessarily that I want to add. I do think, and I mean, I'm not just saying this because obviously we're friends, but I do think, you asked me before, like, what am I kind of learning about this? And like, you know, I am one episode behind, admittedly, on the podcast. But I think this idea about, you know, I suppose my consumption of true crime is maybe quite limited because I'm still kind of someone who is engaging with documentaries, films, television, but also maybe some like I guess like literature, like the novels and books that kind of come out of this. Like, I wouldn't even think to be, not that I'm necessarily the demographic for it either, but you're talking about, I can't remember who they are. You're talking about a YouTuber who was doing makeup tutorials, but talking about particular cases, which I think is really interesting. And I think, like, and again, you don't need me to validate anything that you ever do, which is fine. I just think it's really, I mean, I was reading like Tanya Horrocks' book when she does a chapter, I think it's about like this, can't remember what case it is. I think it was Solange, Jay-Z and Beyonce. And it's like talking about the CCTV footage.
Yeah. It's like in an elevator, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. And it's like
in the UK.
The chapter just sort of like totally deconstructs what we're seeing and what the truth of that actually is. So I just think this idea about these cases across different media forms is just, it's so worthwhile, and it's making me rethink some of the things that I've been like thinking about. Like, sort of, you talk about, you watched the Ted Bundy tapes was something that kind of reignited an interest in true crime. And obviously I think for both of us, people who have kind of worked on big projects for like a long time, that kind of next thing to be engaging with is quite difficult sometimes. But I do think the true crime stuff, because it does have this real impact, it's about real people, and it's about these real cases and people that have been affected and impacted by that, which is maybe a little bit different from research into horror movies that we're kind of interested in as well. There's almost a higher stakes involved, maybe.
I'm definitely aware of what I say.
Do you know what I mean?
A bit
more.
Yeah,
it's kind of. I think you need to be, really. I'll tell you what it is, though. Again, you might have to edit some of this because I'm just rabbiting now. There's a musician called Kristen Hayter, and we've talked about Eileen Warnos a lot today. She had a project called Lingua Ignota, which is very horrible. Well, not very horrible. It's very beautiful, but hauntingly abrasive noise, kind of power electronics type sort of music, right? But a lot of her early music is really influenced by Eileen Warnos and this kind of case and the way that she was treated by men and violence and all that kind of stuff. So that was something that I was really interested in exploring, which again, I think really fits with the work that you're doing, this idea that you've got these different forms of media. You know, Kristen Hayter's Lingua Ignota project, that's probably not going to be conceived of in the same terms of true crime as a documentary, but it kind of is, because it's filtering that experience through a different medium. So basically, I guess what I'm trying to add is that the project that you're doing is maybe reigniting an interest that I had that maybe wasn't there as explicitly in some way, which I guess is it's nice, because that's kind of what these things are meant to be for. I guess
supposed to be doing, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, exactly. So
will somebody else find it interesting? Yes, excellent.
Yes,
that's
definitely.
all I'm here for.
Yeah,
that's all I'm here for. Well, the thing that I would add is, and I thank Shelley for the same thing. I think, in fact, we both mentioned your work as well. I'd like to thank you for your work that you've done on documentary theory, because you've done some of the work for me. Because I mean, I don't have to read it, and it just stops me throwing my laptop out the window in just frustration of how dry it is. So looking at how you've used the fucking wealth of theory and looking at how Shelley's used it as well, it's like it's good shoulders to stand on for when I'm trying to deal with documentary, and I'm forcing myself to even just trying to get the words out now, it's like, oh god, it's so boring.
I mean, I remember.
I don't know why it's so boring. There's a documentary, because we're part of the horror studies special interest group. There's a documentary one as well, and it was just like, oh god, I'm gonna have to ask them to join. And I've decided at the moment I'm going to hold off.
I think I remember when I was doing my PhD though, when I was talking to Steve Jones, obviously another member of the horror kind of fraternity, shall we say? Is that the right word? Probably not. The community rather.
Community.
Sorry. Yeah, when I was doing my PhD, it was like, you know what it is, Steve? Do I have to do like 1 million like words literature review for documentary? He was like, well, that's the challenge because there's so much stuff. I mean, but the thing was, there was like, talking about sort of like the work that I did on the West Memphis Three was kind of like maybe a shorthand way of engaging with some of the wider documentary theory. I remember like for me, it was like Tanya Horek, and I remember reading Stella Bruzzi's book.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like, okay, out of everything that I've read, and Thomas Austin was another guy who was involved in sort of documentary theory and kind of context. Like I was like, I probably just need to read those three because they did a lot of that for me.
They've done it, yeah.
But it took me a while to get to that point, basically.
Yeah. Right. Well, I've come to the end. If you're happy, then I'm happy.
I am happy. Happy with that.
Well, thank you for coming and talking to me about this. And
always a pleasure.
Yeah, and it's also fun to talk to somebody else who, when you know certain cases inside and out, and like, so with West Memphis 3, Shelley knows it very well as well, and like friends and stuff. I mention it, they don't really know what I'm on about, but I would be interested actually. It would be to contact some people who I used to go out to Rockworld with in the 90s.
Yeah.
I wonder if they're aware of that case because it's that little community. Anyway, that's something for me to do by myself. So so thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. In terms of the podcast itself, there's going to be just one more episode to go because I need to stop this now because, as we said at the start, teaching's about to start, so I can't do both. So I am going to bring the podcast, the first series of the podcast to an end. It will come back. I don't know when. It will come back
soon. Hopefully, I've been enjoying
rather
this
than later. But I need to get I need to concentrate on teaching.
Yeah.
For a bit. As usual, follow the project over on Instagram and Facebook, or email me at murdermedia821@gmail.com. Like and share and follow and subscribe and all that bollocks. But I need to say it so that it gets done. I'll speak to you all next week. Goodbye.